DOGE was obviously it was a major story. To keep it from getting political, we're going to look at it through the microscope of federal government real estate. So that's the focus of this. DOGE really came in and like legitimately took over GSA. I mean, there were DOGE officials living in the GSA headquarters building, and there were two DOGE officials who were essentially, one was appointed the administrator of the General Services Administration, and one was the Public Building Service Commissioner. So the distinction there is, the administrators over all of the General Services Administration, the PBS Commissioner, for short, Public Building Service Commissioner. The PBS Commissioner is responsible for all things real estate related that GSA does. So GSA, for those of you who may not be familiar, GSA or PBS GSA is the basically the landlord of the federal government. Not only are they the landlord in that they own and maintain the federal footprint, federal buildings, but they also are essentially kind of the in-house broker of the federal government as well. So they will manage the lease procurement, the lease transactions, not only putting the leases in place, but also going through the tenant improvement, design, construction, and ultimately acceptance phase. And they do that on behalf of other federal agencies within the federal government. Okay, quick primer aside. So DOGE came in and said, hey, we're going to get rid of as many leases as possible. So if it's in the SOLF term, so the portion of the lease that has cancellation rights, we're going to essentially get rid of it. They came out hot and heavy. And ultimately where they got to was, it was like 850-ish GSA leases had received termination notices. Now, what was picked up in the media and misreported even by some of our colleagues, or, call them competition on LinkedIn and other, social media outlets, a lot of people were reporting that these were lease terminations. They were not lease terminations. They were lease termination notices that said within X number of days or by this date, this lease, will be terminated. So we went from, what was originally going to be, 800 plus leases. And ultimately it was made very clear. The goal was to get into the thousands. So DOGE never really realized that outcome. And in fact, what we've seen since they hit their peak of over 800 is it's been a steady decline where more and more of those lease termination notices have been rescinded. Ultimately, what happened is the DOGE team that came in never took the opportunity to understand what was happening in those spaces. And it was really interesting. I mean, because, they would issue a lease termination notice, something would make it into the press. Like, do you realize what's happening at this location? There's this, mission critical function, or is this thing that we have to have. And DOGE would rescind that, or GSA would rescind that lease termination notice. So now where we stand today is, just from a data perspective, well over 50% of the lease termination notices that have gone out have been rescinded. The effect of it is still, TBD. We still need to see how many of these are actually going to move forward to actual lease termination. But the reality is, and the damage has already been done. It's reputational damage. It's the addition of risk or apparent risk that was in a GSA lease that really wasn't there before. So when we look at the outcome of what DOGE did during their tenure at GSA, and I say that in past tense because the administrator and the PBS commissioner that came in and put a lot of these policies in effect, they've now, they're no longer with the agency. They've left. GSA calls it a resignation. Internal sources say it wasn't a resignation. They were asked to leave. But the reputational damage has been done. The financial damage has been done. They've created risk or increase the appearance of risk in a market, in a niche of this market, where previously it was considered to be a fairly low risk niche of the commercial real estate market. I don't know that that's always been the most accurate perception of this space, but that has been the prevailing understanding of this space. And to me, that's kind of going to be the legacy of the DOGE initiative at GSA specifically as it relates to commercial real estate?
Well, I would say, Chad, in addition to the hit of the reputation in the confidence of a GSA lease, a long-lasting impact that we're seeing a lot is the impact of the loss of personnel within the GSA. That, with Region 10 being completely dismantled, a number of folks in the leasing side, in the project management side, all across the country are gone.
Yeah, to put some numbers, there's been thousands of people who have taken either this deferred resignation, this early retirement. Those are the voluntary kind of means, even though it's under duress, it seems as if they were forced to make those decisions. In addition to that, there's the RIFs that happen in the hundreds, right? Of these RIFs, or the reduction in force, these mass layoffs that they implemented as well. So Matt, to your point, it's, there's all these leases there's uncertainty about, but then their inventory of roughly 7,500 leases, they have nobody to be able to even service these. They just, dismantled an entire region, like you mentioned. Region 10 is the Pacific Northwest. The leasing folks, the entirety of the Atlanta Southeast U.S. office, all those leasing folks are gone. So there's really not many people to even be able to service these leases, which is making it even more difficult, right? Who's even taking these projects? The whole region's portfolio had to be transferred over to another region. And then Region 4's leases were transferred amongst 3 different regions as well. So it makes it very complicated, not only just to try to get projects done, but who are you even reaching out to? Who's even going to be able to be there that even has any knowledge about the project or where it is currently? And the other piece of that too is that the idea of reducing all these folks, all these employees within GSA that were doing these leasing activities, was to give that work to the broker contractors. At least that's what it appears to be on the surface. And that broker contract has just been pushed back since the first due date was April 25th or 24th. And we're still waiting for that to even be issued currently, so that there will be additional personnel to help with servicing these projects. So it's uncertainty on the lease side and on the personnel side that is really, conflating this into a huge issue. And these projects are just kind of sitting, and there's significant delays that are continuing to happen across the country.
If the government doesn't issue a request for lease proposal or a request for an offer, can they extend the lease? The landlords are in limbo. I mean, you could have a landlord that says, no, you're out when you're out. There's no holdover. There's no extension. You're out because I've got another tenant ready to move in. What happens with that agency that was in that building? Or if you have a landlord that says, yeah, I'm willing to do an extension with you. I want to keep you in here. Who do they talk to? How long does the extension last? How do you get that extension papered before it expires? So there's just a lot of moving parts that, in my opinion, create a little bit of a legal conundrum when it comes to risk, both on the tenant and the landlord side.
But a lot of those leases aren't even being extended too. They're just going into holdover. We saw the stats there. This isn't it doesn't look like a huge number. They went from about 2% to 3% at one point. That's not a huge increase, but a 50% increase is still a big increase. So, and it seemed as if the previous folks who were in leadership didn't really care too much about those leases going into holdover. It was more of we need to trim all the fat here. Not realizing that they've been trimming the fat for over a decade as it is already. So the issues are just continuing to compound at this stage without a really meaningful remedy or mitigation plan in place.